My brother stood in the middle of our father's warehouse, arms crossed, chin lifted like he'd just won something. It was the day after Dad's funeral. The flowers hadn't even wilted yet. I was 22 years old, fresh out of college, still wearing the black dress I'd bought specifically for burying my father. "I'm taking over," he announced to the room full of employees who'd worked there longer than either of us had been alive. "Dad wanted it this way. The business goes to me." He looked directly at me when he said the next part. "Women don't belong in construction supply. Never have. Never will. You can keep looking for your little office job in the city." This is at the guy who'd totaled 2 company trucks by age 21. At the man who thought having a different chromosome made him qualified to run a business he'd never bothered to learn. I nodded once, turned around, walked out. Behind me, I heard him laugh. 6 years later, I walked back into that same warehouse, but this time I wasn't visiting. I was the new owner. I'd bought it at auction for 18 cents on the dollar. And my brother? He was still there, working. It's about being told your whole life that you don't belong somewhere, and then proving that the people who said it were the ones who never belonged at all. If you've ever been dismissed because of your gender, if you've ever watched someone less qualified get handed what you earned, if you've ever been told to stay in your lane while someone else crashed in theirs, this story is for you. My father started Thompson Building Supply in 1987, 4 years before I was born. He always joked that the business was his first child and I was his second. Started with 1 truck and a rented garage, grew into 3 warehouses across the county, and 42 employees by the time I was in high school. Dad worked 16-hour days, missed birthdays, recitals, school plays, but he built something real, something that mattered. I was the youngest. My brother Richard was 4 years older. From the beginning, the expectations were different. I was expected to help Mom around the house, to do well in school, to be pleasant, and eventually find a good husband. Richard was expected to carry on the family name, to learn the business, to become Dad someday. The problem was, Richard never wanted to learn anything except how to spend money he hadn't earned. When I was 10, I started tagging along to the warehouse on Saturday mornings. Not because anyone invited me, but because I was curious and Dad couldn't find a babysitter. I loved everything about it. The smell of fresh-cut lumber, the organized chaos of the loading dock, the satisfaction of watching empty trucks leave full of materials that would become someone's house, someone's deck, someone's dream. Old Earl, who'd been there since the beginning, took a liking to me, taught me how to read purchase orders, showed me the difference between Douglas fir and southern pine, explained why you never promise a delivery date you can't keep, and why one bad supplier relationship can poison a whole quarter. Richard spent those same years sleeping until noon and playing video games in the basement. When Dad forced him to come to the warehouse, he'd sit in the break room scrolling on his phone, waiting for his sentence to end. He never asked a single question about how anything worked, never seemed to understand that 42 families depended on those warehouses staying profitable, never cared about anything except when he could leave. High school made the divide sharper. I took every business and math class I could find: accounting, economics, statistics. Stayed after school to help the office manager with spreadsheets because I thought it was fun. I graduated second in my class, got accepted to State University's business program with a partial scholarship, and worked 2 part-time jobs to cover what the scholarship didn't, because Dad said the college fund was for Richard. He'd need more help, Dad explained. Boys have to support families. You'll find a husband who provides. I didn't argue. I just worked harder, took summer classes to graduate a semester early, double majored in business administration and supply chain management, graduated summa cum laude at 21 with job offers from 3 different companies. I took the one in the city, starting salary $44,000, and moved into a tiny apartment with 2 roommates, called home every Sunday, asked about the business. Dad would talk for an hour about new product lines, expansion challenges, competition from the big box stores moving into the area. Then he'd catch himself and say, "But you don't need to worry about all that, sweetheart. How's the city? Meeting any nice young men?" Richard, meanwhile, had dropped out of community college after 2 semesters, claiming school wasn't for him. Came home to work at the warehouse, started in the shipping department, got promoted to floor supervisor within 8 months. Not because he'd earned it, because his last name was on the building. I watched from the city as he climbed a ladder he hadn't built, collecting job titles he couldn't define if you paid him. Every Thanksgiving and Christmas, I'd come home and hear about Richard's brilliant ideas. Richard thought they should expand into power tools. Richard wanted to open a second location closer to the suburbs. Richard believed the future was in specialty decking materials. I'd sit there eating my turkey and not mention that I'd suggested those exact same things when I was 16, and Dad had patted my shoulder and said, "That's nice, honey, but leave the business thinking to me and your brother." The funny thing is, Dad would still call me when the numbers confused him, when quarterly reports didn't add up, when a contract had language he didn't understand. He'd email me spreadsheets that Richard was supposed to analyze but couldn't, because Richard had never learned what gross margin meant. I did the work on my lunch breaks, sent it back cleaned up, and watched Richard present my analysis at family dinners like he'd done it himself. "I've been crunching the numbers," he'd say, using phrases from movies. "Looking solid. Real solid." Dad would beam with pride. I'd eat my mashed potatoes and say nothing. Mom knew. She'd catch my eye across the table sometimes, offer a small, sad smile that said everything and nothing at the same time. She'd grown up in a world where this was just how things worked. Her own brothers had inherited the family farm while she got a set of china and a husband. She didn't have the words to call it unfair. She just accepted it as the natural order of things. I loved her too much to make her feel guilty for something she'd never been given the power to change. Dad got sick the spring I turned 21, right before my college graduation. Pancreatic cancer. They found it late, which is how it usually goes with that particular monster. 6 months, the doctors said. Maybe 8, if he was lucky. He wasn't lucky. I took my finals early and moved home for those last months. Richard took a vacation to Miami with his girlfriend, said he needed to process, said the stress was affecting his mental health. He came back tanned and relaxed 2 weeks before the funeral. Spent those final days complaining about how hard it was to watch Dad decline, how nobody understood what he was going through. I held Dad's hand through the nights when the pain was worst. I handled the insurance calls. I made the arrangements. Richard picked out his suit for the funeral. Those last weeks, Dad and I talked more honestly than we ever had. The medication made him loose, unfiltered in ways he'd never allowed himself to be. One night, very late, he grabbed my wrist with more strength than I thought he had left. "I got it backwards," he whispered. "You were always the one who understood. Richard, he doesn't. He can't see what you see. I should have taught you instead. Should have given you the chance." I leaned closer. "What do you mean, Dad?" "The business. It should be yours. But the will's already done. Your mother needs security. Richard needs something to keep him out of trouble. I did it wrong, sweetheart. I'm sorry." He died 4 days later. I stood at the funeral between my mother and brother, listening to Richard talk about legacy and tradition and how he'd been prepared his whole life for this responsibility. I looked at the employees in the back rows, the ones who'd actually kept the company running for decades, and I saw the fear in their eyes. They knew what was coming. So did I. The day after the funeral was when Richard made his announcement. Women don't belong in construction supply. Never have. Never will. I walked out of that warehouse at 22 years old knowing exactly what would happen next. Not because I could see the future, but because I understood business fundamentals that my brother had never bothered to learn. Some outcomes are just math. I went back to the city, threw myself into my job at the logistics company, got promoted twice in 18 months, started putting money aside every paycheck, even when it meant eating ramen 3 nights a week. Read everything I could about business acquisitions, distressed assets, commercial real estate. Took night classes in finance, built a network of contacts in construction supply, people who remembered my dad and didn't think much of my brother. And once a month, I pulled the public records on Thompson Building Supply, tracked revenue trends, watched credit ratings, built a spreadsheet that documented every step of the decline I knew was coming. Year 1 under Richard's management, revenue down 14%. He fired the bookkeeper who'd been there for 20 years, replaced her with a drinking buddy who thought accounts receivable was a type of sports injury. Inventory management fell apart within 6 months. They started running out of basic 2x4s while specialty items gathered dust in the back warehouse. Year 2, revenue down another 19%. Richard expanded into power tools without doing any market research. Didn't notice that the big box store had just opened a location 4 miles away, with prices he couldn't possibly match. Lost 3 major contractor accounts in a single quarter. Laid off 8 employees, including Earl. I heard through the grapevine that Earl had a heart attack 6 months later. His wife said he never recovered from losing the place he'd worked for 28 years. Year 3, down another 21%. Richard took out a second mortgage on the main warehouse to cover payroll, then a third mortgage 3 months later. Started buying cheaper materials to improve margins, destroyed the reputation Dad had spent 2 decades building. Word spread through the industry the way it always does. Thompson Building Supply was circling the drain, and everyone knew it except the man steering it into the rocks. Year 5, Chapter 11 bankruptcy filing. An attempt at reorganization that anyone with basic financial literacy could see was doomed. Richard gave interviews to the local newspaper about how the economy was unfair, how big box stores were killing family businesses, how nobody appreciated small companies anymore. He blamed everything and everyone except himself. I clipped those articles and added them to my file. Year 6. Liquidation. Chapter 11 converted to Chapter 7 by court order, all assets to be sold at auction. 3 warehouses, remaining inventory, customer lists, the Thompson name that my father had built from nothing. Everything reduced to lots in an auction catalog. I was 28 years old. I'd spent 6 years preparing for this exact moment. Had saved and invested and positioned myself. Had built relationships with bankers and investors who believed in my plan. Had created a holding company 2 years earlier. Funded it carefully. Kept it ready. When the auction was announced, I was ready. The auction was on a Tuesday in early March. Gray and cold. The kind of day that feels like it should be significant. I flew in the night before. Stayed at a hotel on the edge of town, didn't tell anyone I was coming. Wore a charcoal suit, nothing flashy. Registered under my company name, not my own. There were other bidders. A regional chain looking to absorb the customer list and shut everything down. A real estate developer who wanted to demolish the main warehouse for condominiums. A liquidation company looking to strip the inventory and flip the land. Nobody who actually wanted to run a construction supply business. Nobody who remembered what Thompson Building Supply used to mean. Bidding opened at $1.8 million for the whole package. All 3 warehouses, remaining inventory, existing contracts, the Thompson name. Dad had turned down $11 million for the company in 2008. Now the bones were being picked over for whatever the market would bear. I waited through the early rounds, let the liquidator and the developer push each other up. Watched the regional chain drop out at $2.6 million. The developer bid $2.9 million. The liquidator countered at $3.1 million. I raised my paddle. $3.4 million. Heads turned. I'd been invisible until then. Just another suit in a room of suits. The auctioneer acknowledged my bid and looked to the others. The liquidator shook his head. The developer whispered with his partner, ran some numbers, came back at $3.5 million. $4 million even, I said. He stared at me, trying to figure out if I was serious or just running up the price for someone else. I kept my expression neutral. He bid $4.2 million, testing. 4.6. He dropped out, gathered his papers, walked to the back of the room. The auctioneer called for any other bids. Silence. The gavel came down. Thompson Building Supply belonged to me. Every warehouse, every forklift, every remaining 2x4 and bag of concrete, the name my father built and my brother destroyed. Mine. I signed the paperwork that afternoon, transferred funds, took legal possession of everything Richard had lost. Then I drove to my mother's house where Richard had been living since his second girlfriend kicked him out 4 months earlier, and I knocked on the door. Mom answered. Her face cycled through 5 emotions in 2 seconds. Surprise, happiness, confusion, concern, something like fear. Honey, what are you doing here? You didn't call. I need to talk to Richard. Is he home? He was in the living room, watching some reality show, beer in hand at 2 in the afternoon. He'd put on weight since Dad's funeral, looked soft and tired in ways that come from avoiding hard truths. He didn't get up when I walked in. Well, little sister, come to say I told you so about something? I came to offer you a job. He laughed, a short, confused sound. A job? What the hell are you talking about? Thompson Building Supply was sold at auction this morning. I bought it. I let those words sit in the air, watched them land, watched his face move through denial, confusion, rage, and finally something close to fear. You bought it? You. With what money? 6 years of working while you were failing, saving while you were spending, planning while you were pretending everyone else was the problem. I kept my voice level, calm. I'm going to rebuild what Dad built, what you destroyed. And I'm offering you a position. This is bullshit, some kind of joke. He looked at Mom standing in the doorway. Are you hearing this? Mom had her hand over her mouth, but she wasn't looking at Richard. She was looking at me. And I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen directed at me before. Pride. It's not a joke, I said. It's business. Something you never understood. Do you want the job or not? What job? What are you even offering? Night shift. Warehouse 3. Inventory and restocking. $39,000 a year plus benefits. Entry level, but you can work your way up if you prove yourself. Same path everyone else has to take. Same path I had to take. His face went through another series of expressions: rage, humiliation, disbelief. His hands were shaking around the beer bottle. For a second I thought he might throw it. Instead he laughed again. Hollow this time. Broken. You want me to work the night shift in my family's warehouse, taking orders from my little sister. It's not your family's warehouse anymore. It's my warehouse. And yes, that's the offer. Take it or leave it. I gestured at the living room, at the beer, at the television playing to no one. But look around, Richard. What else are you going to do? Who else is going to hire someone with your resume? He didn't answer, just stood there breathing hard, trying to find words that wouldn't come. The offer's good for 72 hours. After that, I fill the position with someone else. I turned to Mom. We should have dinner this week. I'm going to be around for a while. I walked out, drove to the main warehouse, stood in the empty parking lot as the sun set, looking at the building where I'd learned to love lumber and logistics before anyone thought to teach me. The Thompson Building Supply sign was faded and dirty, 2 letters burned out. I'd fix that first thing tomorrow. First of many things. The next 18 months were the hardest and most satisfying of my life. I tracked down as many former employees as I could find, reached out to contractors who'd been loyal to Dad, apologized for the years of decline, offered terms that rebuilt trust, hired an accountant who actually understood accounting, implemented inventory systems I'd been designing in my head since I was 16, cut the product lines that were bleeding money, doubled down on the ones that made sense, found suppliers who valued reliability over rock-bottom prices. Richard showed up on day 3. Didn't say a word. Just walked into HR and filled out his application like any other new hire. Started that night. I didn't gloat, didn't make any speeches, just assigned him his duties and let him work. He was bitter and surly for the first several months. Did the bare minimum. Avoided eye contact. Probably told himself he was just waiting for something better to come along. But something better never came, because he'd never built the skills that create something better. And slowly, over time, he started actually learning the business he'd inherited and lost. Started asking questions about inventory systems. Started paying attention to how things worked. I moved him to day shift after 10 months, not because he was my brother, but because he'd earned it. He'd shown up every night, done his job without complaint, started taking initiative. It wasn't redemption exactly, more like a very delayed education. Better late than never, I suppose. Mom visits the warehouse sometimes now, sits in the break room, drinks coffee, watches the operation run smoothly. She told me last month that Dad would be proud. I told her the truth. I stopped needing his pride a long time ago. I built this for myself. For the 10-year-old girl who loved the smell of sawdust and the puzzle of supply chains. For every woman who was ever told she didn't belong somewhere and decided to prove she belonged more than anyone. The business turned profitable in year 2 of my ownership. We opened a 4th location 6 months ago. Revenue is up 53% from when I took over, and we're on track to exceed Dad's peak numbers by next year. Contractors who'd written us off have come back. New ones are signing on every month. The Thompson name means something again. Richard and I don't talk much outside of work. Too much history, too many years of unfairness that can't be erased by good quarterly reports. But we're professional, civil. He does his job well now, and I do mine. Sometimes I catch him watching me when I'm walking the floor, talking to employees, solving problems. I can never quite read his expression. Maybe he's still angry. Maybe he finally understands what he threw away. Maybe he's just tired. Last Thanksgiving, Mom hosted dinner at her house. Richard brought his new girlfriend, a woman who works in banking and seems blissfully unaware of all the history. We ate turkey and made small talk and pretended to be a normal family for a few hours. After dinner, Richard found me alone in the kitchen. I never said thank you, he said quietly, for the job, for not making it worse than it had to be. I looked at my brother, at the gray starting at his temples, the lines around his eyes, the weight he still carried from years of avoiding hard truths. You're welcome, I said. I was wrong. What I said at Dad's funeral, about women not belonging. He couldn't quite meet my eyes. I was wrong about everything. Yes, I said. You were. He nodded, went back to the living room. I stayed in the kitchen for a minute, looking out the window at the backyard where we used to play as kids, before anyone told us we were supposed to want different things. I still have the spreadsheet, the one I kept for 6 years, tracking every step of the decline, waiting for my moment. It's buried in a folder on my laptop that I never open anymore, but I keep it. Not as a trophy, as proof. That patience is a strategy. That competence wins eventually. That the people who tell you that you don't belong are usually the ones who never should have been there in the first place. The sign out front is brand new. Same design as the original, the one Dad hung in 1987. Thompson Building Supply, family owned since 1987. I added one line at the bottom. Under new management. The old-timers smile when they see it. The ones who remember the little girl who used to spend Saturdays learning purchase orders from Earl. The ones who watched Richard run their livelihoods into the ground while I built my plan from 200 miles away. They get the joke. So do I. If you've ever been told you don't belong somewhere because of who you are, this story is for you. If you've ever watched someone less qualified get handed what you deserved and then destroy it completely, this is for you. If you've ever waited years for the chance to prove everyone wrong and then actually done it, this is for you. You don't have to fight every battle the moment it happens. Sometimes the smartest move is to step back, build your strength, and wait for exactly the right moment. Tell me in the comments, have you ever been passed over for something you deserved? Did you eventually get your chance? I read every single story. And if you want more stories about people who were underestimated and then exceeded every expectation, subscribe. Sometimes the best revenge isn't anger. It's a business that runs better than it ever did. It's a sign with your name on the deed. It's watching the person who dismissed you clock in for the night shift while you lock up the office and drive home.